as we enter the fiscal year 2018 budget season. Our panel of the service personnel chiefs is here to address each of their services personnel postures, including personnel policies for recruiting and retention, family programs, and to address budget and legislative requests for fiscal year 2018 to the extent that they can. Today's focus is on the personnel policies the services currently have to sustain and create efficiencies, in which includes promotion policy, bonus and incentive policies, and in-strength changes that still need to be examined in light of proposed increases and the ensuing challenges. I'm especially interested in your plans for retention of the right service members that are central to your mission, and what may develop into difficult recruiting and retention environment in the coming years. We'd like to understand the policies and programs that will be used to maintain and increase personnel in-strengths. Before I introduce our panel, let me offer Congressman Speer an opportunity to make any opening remarks. Ms. Speer.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and thank you to all of our witnesses who are here today. This is a critical time to hear from you. The services have spent the past several years implementing end strength reductions. Before we commit to growing the force again, we need to take a very good look beyond just the numbers, because for each and every new service member that commits to military service, we are signing the government up for a lifelong commitment to them as well, a commitment that will come with a significant cost. I'm interested in hearing how the services are going to compete in an increasingly competitive labor market and retain the skilled individuals they invest in while still operating in a constrained budget environment. In the past, recruiting challenges have been addressed by lowering standards, a tactic I do not support and presume you do not as well. But simply adding manpower will not address the personnel challenges of today and tomorrow. We also need to focus on retention, quality of life, and fostering a culture of respect for all service members. These are areas in which I believe current efforts are insufficient. Skilled women and men are abandoning the military in response to a persistent plague of harassment, assault, and degradation. Further, cuts to family programs and housing allowances run counter to trends in the private sector, providing even more enticement to leave. We also need to think creatively about how the services manage people. I'm interested in hearing how the services are going to transform their personnel management policies to better manage and retain talent. There have been many proposals over the past few years, and many of these initiatives can be accomplished internally without changes in law, but will most likely require a cultural shift, which has always seemed to be the biggest challenge. I understand that this may be General McConville's last hearing as the Army's personnel chief, and that he may be moving up. Thank you for all you've done as Army's G1, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you, Ranking Member Speer. Let me welcome our panel. Lieutenant General James McConville, Deputy Chief of Staff, G1 United States Army. Additionally, I'd like to also congratulate General McConville on his nomination to be the United States Army's Vice Chief of Staff. Vice Admiral Robert Burke, Chief of Naval Personnel, United States Navy. Lieutenant General Mark Brikalis, Deputy Chief of Staff for Manpower, Deputy Commandant for Manpower and Reserve Affairs, United States Marine Corps. Lieutenant General Gina Grosso, Deputy Chief of Staff for Manpower, Personnel, and Services, United States Air Force. General McConville, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, sir, and Chairman Kaufman, Ranking Member Speer, distinguished members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you on behalf of the United States Army. I have submitted a statement for the record, but I would like to highlight a couple of points. The Army's people, our soldiers, our civilians, our retirees, veterans, and families are our greatest asset. They are our greatest weapon system. And there's a continued need for a ready force, one that is fully manned, fully equipped, and trained, is evidenced daily by the international events. Predictable and timely funding are key to manning the Army and accomplishing our missions. We thank you for the increase in end strength of 28,000. That will improve our readiness, ensure that the Army has better manned formations. I want to thank you for all you've done. And as we move into the future, you asked about talent management. We are moving from a personnel management system to a modern talent management system that will allow us to more effectively manage all three components of the Army. Diversity is important to the Army. Through our outreach and marketing efforts, we are increasing the diversity of our force in underrepresented branches and occupations. We're committed to giving all soldiers the opportunity to serve in whatever military occupation they can meet the standards are. Currently, all military occupations are open to women, and women serve in every battalion in the active Army. We remain focused on personal resiliency and suicide prevention with world-class programs for our soldiers, civilians, and families, and we are aggressively working to decrease the stigma associated with seeking behavioral health care. Sexual assault and sexual harassment have no place in our ranks and diminish our readiness. Our recently published Workplace and Gender Relations Survey active duty members shows a decrease in prevalence and increase in reporting, but there is much work to be done. At the end of the day, the Army is people, the men and women who serve our country today, along with their families, and all those are vital to the security of our nation. I thank you for your continued support of the All-Volunteer Army and look forward to your questions.
Chairman Kaufman, Ranking Member Spear, and distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss Navy manpower, personnel, training, education, and family support programs. I'm honored to represent the men and women in the United States Navy. For 240 years, the Navy has been a cornerstone of American security and prosperity. Now more than ever, the Navy is important to national security, and so are its people. As Chief of Naval Personnel, I am responsible for ensuring our ships, squadrons, submarines, and stations are fully manned with sailors who are ready to undertake the many jobs and tasks we ask of them. This responsibility includes finding and recruiting talented individuals, as well as executing training pipelines that transform sailors into highly skilled maritime warriors. While the Navy has healthy recruiting, retention, and manning today, it is vital we update policies that position us to deal with challenges before we are confronted with a crisis. As with the weapons systems we use, we must continue to refresh our personnel system to keep pace with the rapidly changing world, and we must do so with a sense of urgency. Our workforce must be poised to adapt quickly to new and evolving threats as we continue to work to attract and retain the very best sailors in an increasingly competitive talent market. We will continue to evaluate our policies, practices, delivery systems, and when appropriate, we will pursue additional avenues with your help to improve readiness and also to provide sailors choice and flexibility. Sailor 2025 is an effort we began a few years ago and is a roadmap to help us do just that. Today, it consists of about 45 different initiatives aimed at modernizing our personnel management and training systems to more effectively recruit, train, and manage our force while also improving the Navy's warfighting readiness. At the foundation of these initiatives is an effort to streamline and optimize our organizational processes. Today, our success greatly depends upon the extraordinary efforts of sailors and Navy civilians working tirelessly to overcome an aging personnel business model and a non-coherent and manually intensive family of 55 personnel IT systems. That is why we are transforming the way we operate, leveraging modern commercial IT capabilities and practices that will help us improve fleet readiness and customer service to our sailors, reducing operating costs and helping us to manage our organizational data and programs. Ultimately, this transformation is intended to holistically improve the way we manage sailors' careers and deliver personnel readiness to our Navy. I look forward to working with you as we build the Navy of tomorrow together, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Kaufman, Ranking Member Spear, distinguished members of the subcommittee, it is my privilege to appear before you to discuss your Marine Corps. Marines are the foundation of the Corps. They are the service's most critical resource and always will be. Your Marines are recruited, educated, trained, and retained to win our nation's battles. Everything we do in the Marine Corps must contribute to their readiness and their ability to win in battle. Overall, Marine Corps recruiting and retention remains strong. Our recruiters continue to find high-quality men and women of character who want to take up the challenge to be United States Marines. We will make our recruiting mission this year, and we'll have a start pool for next year above 50%. Over 99% of those who we will ship will be Tier 1 traditional high school graduates or the equivalent. We thank you for the increased end strength authorization in last year's NDAA that takes us to 185,000 in the active component. This increase serves to enable our retaining critical warfighting capabilities while improving information-related capabilities and capacities necessary in an increasingly dynamic operating environment. Along with the other services, the Marine Corps is diligently preparing for the new blended retirement system that goes into effect on January 1st. This new system represents the most significant change in military compensation in many years. So the financial education of each Marine is a priority. To this end, we have implemented an integrated communications plan to increase awareness. I have personally discussed the BRS at major installations with our leaders and recently spoke to our prospective commanders course about the challenge of preparing over 184,000 Marines in both the active and the reserve component for this important opt-in decision during 2018. We must get this right. Thereafter, we will closely be monitoring the BRS for any unintended consequences, including those affecting retention. Your Marines are proud of what they do. They are proud of the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor and what it and each Marine represents to our nation. With your continued support, a vibrant Marine Corps will be ready to meet our nation's call. Thank you again for the opportunity to present this testimony, and I look forward to your questions.
Chairman Kaufman, Ranking Member Spear, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to deliver the Air Force personnel posture for fiscal year 2018. America's Air Force is always there, providing global vigilance, global reach, and global power to combatant commanders around the world. However, being always there comes at a cost to equipment, infrastructure, and most importantly, our airmen. Sustained global commitments and continued budgetary uncertainty have diminished our ability to successfully balance capability, capacity, and readiness. Simultaneously, the Air Force experienced increased demand in enduring missions and growth in new mission sets such as cyber, remotely piloted aircraft, information surveillance and reconnaissance, and special operations. The Air Force is currently facing three distinct personnel challenges. First, the need for increased end strength to support current mission requirements. Second, the national pilot crisis. And finally, meeting the quality of life and quality of service needs of our airmen and their families. Our first challenge is obtaining the end strength the Air Force needs to support current mission requirements. We're grateful for the congressional support to increase FY17 active duty end strength levels to 321,000 airmen. Even with this increase, Air Force readiness depends on responsible growth in fiscal year 18 to a requested total force end strength level of 675,000 airmen. This growth is necessary to support current operations. Our second challenge is the national pilot crisis. As you are aware, we discussed the pilot shortage at length in our March 29th hearing. I will just add to that discussion that we are meeting with several airline senior executives tomorrow to seek ways to collaboratively address the national pilot shortage. The third challenge to note today is ensuring we meet the quality of life and quality of service needs of our airmen and their families. Our force readiness depends on a strong, resilient force. We are increasing resiliency skills programs by adding installation resilience trainers, evaluating military family needs, and ensuring airmen exposed to combat and traumatic events receive needed care. Unfortunately, working against our resiliency efforts is any form of interpersonal or self-directed violence, to include sexual assault and suicide. Any number of incidents is one too many. Additionally, violence is not always physical, as forms of violence have bled into social media. Since my testimony on to this committee on the Air Force's social media policies, the Chief of Staff chartered a working group to evaluate the policies in place for appropriate conduct online and via social media. New guidance is currently in coordination. This guidance will be punitive and will be completed and issued in the next 60 days. As we move beyond our immediate challenges, we're planning and preparing for the future. To do this, the Air Force established a comprehensive human capital strategy across 6 lines of effort to address talent planning, talent acquisition, talent development and utilization, talent evaluation, compensation and retention, and finally, transition. Our talent management strategy focuses on best leverage the abilities of our total force airmen, maximize efficiencies, and increase human performance to produce warfighters and leaders for the Air Force and Joint Force. To further our strategy, we established a talent management innovation cell to rapidly identify and deploy initiatives within existing authorities. As this team produces policies and programs to better attract and retain talent, we will work with our service partners and the Office of the Secretary of Defense to present options to Congress to modify or add authorities as needed. Our talent strategy would not be possible without the support and authorities Congress has already given us. For example, we're using the Career Intermission Program Authority to provide career flexibility to our airmen and their families. Additionally, the Air Force is grateful for congressional support and continuation of direct hire authorities to hire talented civilian airmen directly from our universities, expand the access of professionals for our depots, and increase hiring speed to bolster our cyber mission forces. We also appreciate the authority granted for expanded parental leave and the first aviation bonus increase in 18 years. The increased bonus will help alleviate our pilot crisis by retaining more pilots after their initial active duty service commitments. Thank you for allowing me to cover our current personnel challenges today and share with you how we are preparing for the future. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General Grosso. First question to the Army, Lieutenant General McConville. I'm concerned, and I think the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee for the House Armed Services Committee looked at this issue, and that is in Afghanistan force management levels, and that what the combatant commander was quite frankly forced to do was kind of work with those numbers, and in working with those numbers, they display, like for instance, helicopter units, they displaced the enablers of the maintenance personnel with civilian contractors, I believe at a higher, not only at a higher cost, but really, I think, compromising the technical skills of those enablers that didn't have the airframes to work on while they were in Afghanistan. But so what they would do, so the objective was, if they only allowed so many uniformed military personnel to supplant some of those uniformed military personnel with contractors. I think we need a policy of what we're really not going to do in terms of enablers. Maybe the policy was simply wrong to begin with, but I wonder if you can reflect on that.
Well, I can, as far as I think it's absolutely critical that we train the entire force. So having commanded aviation units, actually, people tend to focus on the pilots, but the maintainers, the people that fix the helicopters, the people that refuel those helicopters, if they don't deploy with you, you need to make sure that they're getting the training someplace else, because if not, those aircraft will not fly. And when you return from that deployment, and the pilots redeploy from that deployment, you'll not have a unit that's ready to go to combat. So I think it's very, very important that if the troops did not deploy with all their enablers, those enablers have the opportunity to get the training, and that's what we're doing right now.
Sure, and I guess that's at our policy level to say, it's simply wrong to send those aircraft frames without the enablers. It's simply because we're trying to show the American people that our troop numbers are down, when the reality is we're just substituting uniformed military personnel for higher priced contractors in a war zone. And so I just think that's inappropriate, and I think one thing that this subcommittee will take a look at is where do we draw the line in terms of what's inappropriate for a civilian contractor to do versus a uniformed military. I'd like to hear from each one of you. So many times I think we talk more about the officer's side of the equation, but on the enlisted side, what is a critical career field that it's difficult to, I think accessions are not a problem, I'm assuming, but to retain, in terms of retention, what would be a career field in your respective branch of service that is difficult in terms of retention on the enlisted side? Why don't we start with you, General Grosso?
Sir, on the enlisted side, we have actually unprecedented retention with the exception of 5 career fields that we're following closely. Cyber defense, battlefield airmen, which is our PJs, our CIRI, our TACPs, intelligence, explosive ordnance disposal, and then select nuclear enterprise specialties.
And this is on the retention side?
This is on the retention side, yes, sir. And we use the tools that you've given us, selective reenlistment bonuses, career status retention bonuses, things that we can do in the assignment process, giving more flexibility, more say in the assignment process, watching family issues to understand if there's some family challenges there. But we have over 200 enlisted specialties, so this is a small subset that we're not.
What's the most critical out of the 5?
We actually don't have a way to we don't rank these 1 to 5. We don't think of it that way. We don't have enough, we're not retaining enough of these specialties to sustain the force, and we focus on all of these to fix individually.
Okay. General Brikalis?
Sure, thanks. We have some fields, cyber,
Okay.
some intel fields, human counter intel. Those have been challenged with retentions. Part of the challenge, some of our MOS, especially in the cyber, are what we call lat move MOSs. So we take junior Marines from various MOSs and meeting those requirements because very, very technical, very difficult training. There are incentives that we use to attract those individuals. And we're taking a look at how we've contracted them in the past and how we'll do it in the future, whether we finish the training, get your certification, and then you serve out your contract length. So there are a number of different MOSs. In the combat arms, we're doing very well. In the aviation community, we're doing very well.
Retention,
so
okay.
We are. It's really in those low density, high demand MOSs and some of the more highly technical MOSs where we're having some retention challenges. We use the SRBs, and we have in the past used an operating what we call an OPT-4 kicker.
Vice Admiral Burke?
Yes, sir. For the Navy, our number one challenge continues to be our nuclear-trained enlisted ratings. And then a very close tie there would be the linguists and the cryptology specialists, almost identical, vocational aptitude requirements, required both for recruiting nukes and the linguists. So they're both a recruiting challenge and a retention challenge. And then on the retention front, number 3 and 4 after that would be the cyber offense and defense, and then all the advanced electronics fields. And we're managing all of those retention-wise with the SRBs. We are having to start to ratchet those numbers back up.
Thank you. Lieutenant General McConnell?
Cyber is huge. We're training
Okay.
these kids, giving them incredible capabilities, and then we start to get into the languages and cryptology type things where they're very marketable to other organizations.
Okay.
And so.
Okay. Ranking Member Spear?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses again. I'm trying to get a handle on the 2017 NDAA. Lieutenant General McConville, the Army had an addition of how many? Was it 16,000?
It's 16,000, ma'am, in the active. It's 28,000 total. So reserve the National Guard had an increase of 8,000, and the reserve had an increase of 4,000.
Okay, and the Navy, Vice Admiral?
We were nearly flat.
Flat. Marines?
Ma'am, we had a 3,000 person increase in the active component, none in the reserve component.
Okay. Air Force?
Ma'am, 4,000 in the active component and a steady state in the rest.
Okay. So let's start with you, General McConville. It appears that you were originally going to have to reduce your strength by some 16,000 or 15,000, and then all of a sudden it reversed to an increase of 16,000. How did you accomplish that, and what's the cost associated with that?
Well, when we started the year, I'll talk about the active force, it was 475,000 starting the year, and we were on a path to reduce the active component to 460,000. So we're basically going to, if nothing happened, if the NDA 17 didn't come out, we would have reduced the Army by 15,000. The authorization we got was 476, so it stopped the reduction, the drawdown, but the Army is coming down, so all the systems were set to bring the Army down. So what we're doing is we're in a drawdown, and now we're reversing that drawdown, and we are, what we did was we went ahead and increased our enlistments by 6,000. We retained 9,000 more soldiers in the field, and we increased our officer accessions by 1,000 to get that 16,000.
Okay. Vice Admiral Burke, you were flatlined, okay. Lieutenant General Brikalis?
Yes, ma'am. We were at 202,000 at the height of our end strength, and we were coming down some 20,000. There was we were heading down to 182,000. We did that over the course of 4 years. Then Commandant Dunford requested a one-year extension to stay at 184,000, and so where we found ourselves was a little bit below 184,000. The Congress gave us the additional 3,000, and so we were going to meet that by assessing 2,000 additional Marines. And we've been very clear, we are not going to compromise on quality, and so we will make the rest of it up in the coming year. Because the law came later in the year and the money came even later, we did not want to do any retention actions that would compromise quality.
Okay, Lieutenant General Grosso?
Ma'am, we hit a low in FY15 of 311,000. So we had the big push in FY16 where we grew to 317,000. And to do that, we had to put some additional resources into the recruiting effort, both people and dollars. But we had the capacity in our training infrastructure, so I'd get you the dollar cost of that.
Okay. So advertising, how much is spent on advertising for each of your services?
About $230 million
Advertising?
for marketing, for total marketing.
Wow. Okay. Navy?
Ma'am, we've been on a declining trend. 17's budget is $47 million. That's down from $56 million the 2 years prior.
The ideal requirement is $100 million. The fact is we're budgeted at about $82 million this year.
Okay.
We're about 110 million for advertising.
Okay, so if we add you all up together, we're looking at close to what, $450 million, give or take. How do we measure the value?
Well,
I mean, because you advertise at NASCAR, how do we know someone, what are the deliverables from that?
well, what we have metrics that we look at, and some of the metrics include how many people that were not favorable towards maybe serving the military. By the basis of advertising, we track influences, how many people are favorable, how many people come on to our Go Army social media, and then we track the investment of those dollars and the return on how many leads we get of young men and women that want to actually come into the Army.
So in politics today, you know, the cost of advertising is very high, whether it's print or TV, and there's a whole movement to social media, which is much cheaper. So I'm curious to what extent my time is out, so maybe over the second round we can talk about it. It seems like we would be much better served, take that money, put some of that into social media, and reduce what we're spending on some of these boutique operations that we have going on. And it sounds like basically from most of you, with the exception of Lieutenant General Grosso, that you're not having any problem filling these vacancies. It appears some of the issues are around retention, particularly in cyber and intelligence, but we can address that second round. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spear. Mr. Bacon, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank each of you for your leadership, and I think you each have a tough job, and I think Congress owes each of the services better. We've raised money, we've cut money, we've done sequesters, we've done CRs, and that always impacts how many people we have in each of the service. And after 30 years of experience myself, the people are at the end of that whip going up and down, and I think we owe you more stability, more predictability. So we're going to work hard to do that. I want to ask each of you, what is the number one reason for an officer in your service, the number one reason for an enlisted in your service to decide to get out early? And I just want to see what we can learn from it. And I'll just start off with General McConville.
I think many come in to serve. What we're seeing is they're taking the opportunities, they're taking the training, they want to serve their country, and they want to live the American dream. You come in, you serve your country for a tour. That's what we'd like them to do. They take the GI Bill, they go off, get to college, raise a family, and what we want them to do is become soldiers for life and go out there and hire our vets in their occupations, and also inspire other young men and women to serve. And what we've found is 79% of our recruits that come in the Army have a family member that serves. So we've kind of tasked them to do that.
Thank you. Admiral Burke.
Sir, I'd say it's the same thing for the Navy. You know, whether they stay in for a career in the active component, or they go and affiliate with the reserves, or go on and be a great citizen and advocate for the Navy in society. You know, some folks come in to get an education. They come in to grow up and learn about themselves, set themselves up for another walk in life. Some folks don't necessarily agree with the long periods of family separation and deployment life that the seagoing service has. So that's
I
probably
did one
the
tour on
number
the
one.
Carl Vinson, and I can speak. That was
That's
an experience
that's
for the
one
airmen.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. 39 years ago, I signed on with the intention to serve for 3 years. I was going to go be a captain of industry with my business degree. And here I am after two times where I actually thought about leaving the service, but I decided.
Someone did a bait and switch on you somehow.
That's right, sir. 75% of every annual cohort that we recruit will leave the service.
Right.
With 2/3 of the Marine Corps in the operating forces, it's a young force, and we have no place to put everybody in the career force. We have youngsters that join the Marine Corps to do just that, join the Corps, prove themselves, join the team. Whether they joined to fight in the last decade or where they're joining to serve as they're doing now, those individuals join the Marine Corps to get that experience, to be that Marine. We try to mold them and send them back to be good citizens. But we've got a lot of folks who've got a plan in life, and the Marine Corps is part of that plan, and staying in the Marine Corps is not part of that plan.
Right.
And I think I can say the same thing for our officers.
Thank you. General Grosso?
I think the number one reason they tell us is separation from family.
Yeah.
So when you're at that point where either your enlistment is up or your officer doesn't have a commitment, they evaluate their situation and their predictability to be separated and make a decision.
This is my own personal experience. I think when the family member said they've had enough, it's hard for the active duty member or Guard or Reserve to stay in. Normally we're having a good time, you know, enjoying ourselves, or the morale, the mission inspires us, but when the family said they've had enough, it's hard to stay in. I would also, let me just point out, my experience has been when we feel like we're part of an elite service with modern equipment, great training, people want to be a part of the elite. But when we've cut training, have 25-year-old equipment, that also undermines our retention. So one other question for my time here, what is the rates of your non-deployable folks? I think we're growing. I'm hearing, anecdotally anyway, that some of the services, that number is growing, which means it's falling on fewer and fewer people, which means then they have more health problems and becomes a cycle. Are you seeing the trends growing for your non-deployables for health reasons, and should we fix that somehow? General McConville.
Well, in the Army, we're about 10% non-deployables. We're actually come down from the peak of the war. We're running probably about 14 to 15%. What we're doing is really at every phase of when we bring soldiers in, we put an occupational physical assessment test, so you have to get in shape before you start initial military training. Then when you come to initial military training, if you're not ready to start, we get you in shape there, and when you come to the unit, we're even putting physical therapists in the unit, because what we're finding is musculoskeletal injuries are the biggest cause of soldiers being non-deployable, and we got to work them through the whole cycle to make that happen.
Admiral Burke.
Yeah, in a Navy of about 335,000 active component folks, we have a little less than 2,000 that are non-deployable because of legitimate medical issues. And then we've got about 18,000 that are overdue for their dental exams. And that's something that we continuously work on. We're in the midst of changing our program for our overseas and sea duty screening to make it on par with our physical fitness program, put the onus on the individual that it has to be done at certain periodicities. And so we're changing that paradigm. And then the only other factor is operational holds for sea duty for pregnant women, but very, very low numbers.
Thank you. I know I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, but hopefully they can, maybe the last two could answer the question.
Sure.
I defer to you.
Yeah, go ahead and finish the.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, you got a couple different types of non-deployables, those in the brig, those in the hospital. those that are in the integrated disability evaluation system, et cetera. You have, those are kind of the long-term non-deployables, and then you have the short-term. Those that go to the hospital, get a surgery, come back, rehabilitate, and come in and out. I can't give you the exact numbers. They're something that we track. I have to brief the commandant on them quarterly and explain to them as far as that goes. We've taken steps to reduce the backlog in the disability evaluation system, and we're making progress as far as that goes. We've got just over 2,000 Marines in that particular process. It's a complex question, but I'd be happy to have that discussion with your staff offline.
Myself as well. I do not bring that data with me, but I'll be happy to get that to you.
That's fine. Ms. Songus, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to our witnesses. I appreciate the chance to talk with each of you today about the military services recruitment efforts, and in particular, I have an interest in the importance of recruiting more women into the armed forces. Readiness depends and meeting all the needs that you all have depends upon the ability of the services to take advantage of the talent pool across all segments of society. And this is particularly true when it comes to leveraging the talents of women, as they constitute half of our citizenry and are proportionately underrepresented in all the services. So with this in mind, I'd like to ask all of you, the most recent report of the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Service, DACOWITS, notes that some of the services have instituted, quote, credible, meaningful accession goals for women, unquote, in connection with integration of women into previously closed combat arms, military occupational specialties, and units. So I'd like to ask each of you, have you set such goals? And if you have, how you have adapted your recruitment strategies to meet those goals?
Well, for the Army, as far as I just would like to say, we have 170,000 women in the United States Army right now, which is, when you think, that is a significant portion of the force. We have women serving in every infantry, armor, and artillery battalion in every brigade combat team in the Army. And we're seeing, as we've opened up all the occupations to women, many more women are serving. We're seeing places like West Point, where I was the second class with women at West Point when I went in 1981. We're running probably 5 or 6%. We're seeing rates of 24% in the classes coming in. So we're seeing an increase. We have not set exact goals, but in the field and at recruiting, we are actively recruiting women, and we need to, because they're high quality. And as we grow the Army, we are not going to reduce the standards. So we need high quality women and high quality everyone that come into the Army.
Admiral Burke.
Yes, ma'am. Today, the Navy is at 18% women. The last 3 years, we've exceeded 25% women enlisted accessions. This last year was almost 27%. The Naval Academy graduating class this year will be almost 27%. For us, it's become a readiness issue with technical graduates, numbers of women with technical degrees growing, and the number of technical degrees that we rely on to do the jobs that we have in the Navy. So it's an increasing readiness issue. We've drastically increased the mixed gender representation in our recruiting material. Last year, that included shifts in what we do for special warfare, and including things that we do out in the field when we represent what we call our Warrior Challenge rating. So that's SEALs, Special Warfare Combat Crews, EOD divers. And then we send out a lot of female representatives for public events and things of that nature. And then the submarine force as well. We're doing quite well in that area. So progress. And then in terms of what roles we're moving those women into, which occupational specialties or ratings, as we call them in the Navy, we're moving them into fields that had been traditionally underrepresented by women, increasingly moving them into technical fields, and increasingly, they're becoming increasingly comfortable in those fields that had been previously underrepresented by women. So we need them in those fields. We need them to do those jobs.
General Brikalis.
Representative Songs, thank you. We have no specific quota for women, other than more. Right now, the commandant has put us on a trajectory to increase the number of females represented in the Marine Corps. The initial goal is 10%. That's maximizing the existing infrastructure that we have for our recruit training. I owe him an answer at the end of the summer on a plan to go to the next particular level as far as that goes. Accompanying that direction was decisions to improve the quality of the young ladies that we bring into the Marine Corps. We have seen an increase in their intelligence scores, their physical fitness scores. We have seen a reduction in the attrition at recruit training, and all those point to a direction that Recruiting Command has taken the drive toward quality seriously. I think your question was really kind of focused on quotas in the integration of our previously closed units. We don't have any quotas. We don't have quotas for our male Marines. Every individual that comes in to join the Marine Corps, we ask them what they want to do, and we try and fit that to what they're trying to aspire to.
And General, do I have a few minutes for General Grosso to answer, Mr. Chairman? Yeah.
Ma'am, we do have applicant goals for both the Academy and for ROTC. Obviously, that doesn't mean they get assessed, and we have seen the number of women going increasing due to those applicant goals. But we do have women in almost every skill in the Air Force, with the exception of those we just opened, our high-end battlefield airmen, and we do targeted recruiting for women across all of our skill sets.
Thank you.
Mr. Kelly, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank each of you witnesses for being here today. Going back just real briefly on what I think General Bacon asked, or Congressman Bacon asked on non-deployables. I'm one of those guys who served 31 years in the reserves and done multiple deployments. It bothers me when you're permanently non-deployable. Temporary is a whole different ballgame. We need to get those guys back in the fight, guys and girls back in the fight. But these permanently non-deployables, if I play in the NFL and I tear my ACL and I can't run anymore, and I don't run a 4.4 anymore, I run a 4.9, I don't still get to play football. And so if you can't go and do the things that you're required by your country, then we need to look for a way to get those guys into the thing. And which leads me to my next point, which is the new blended retirement system. And guys, I'm scared to death of that, because in our low-density MOSs in the Army, and I speak Army speak more than I do the other, but Signal and MI and those very tough branches that you have to have high scores to get in, the training is better in the military than you can get in the civilian world, and so there's a high pool to get those guys out, and the promotions aren't there necessarily, and the money, and with the blended retirement system, we're going to lose those critical guys, those captains and majors. We're going to lose those E6s and E7s at the peak of their career. I'm wondering, what are we doing now to address that 12 to 14-year soldier, airman? What are we doing now to address that, to make sure that we don't get a huge retention problem 12 years from now?
Well, from the Army standpoint, we're moving from an industrial age personnel management system to what I would call a talent management system. And sir, your point is well taken. It used to be if you got someone past 10 years, you basically had them for 20. I find even today with the young men and women, they're incredibly talented, but having 3 that are in the service right now, they're millennials, and they look at things differently than we need to. They want their talent managers. They want us to respect what their knowledge, skills, or ability, and we can't treat them, kind of like round pegs and expect them to go through their careers. So we're going to have to manage their talents. We don't know yet what the blended retirement system is going to do, but there are some opportunities here. There's opportunities the way the system's done that we can give critical bonuses at the 8 to 12 year. There's things that we have to do in the system that are getting the folks in the right job at the right place so they want to stay. When we look at cyber, the MOS, if we can incentivize them right, they will stay because they get to do things in the Army that they can't do in the civilian world. And as you all understand, there's some incredible things that they get to do serving their country. We just have to compensate them so the families will stay.
Yes, sir. If y'all would be, because I have one more question I want to get to, so if you can be quick, I'd like to hear from all of you real quick.
Yes, sir. From the Navy standpoint, similar approach with our Sailor 2025. It is about providing that flexibility in those career choices. But again, I think the flexibility you gave us in the 2017 NDAA to control the timing of that continuation pay, and then as we adjust our selective re-enlistment bonuses around that, I think we're going to have the latitude we need to be able to control the retention behavior we need.
Sir, it's incumbent on us to give our Marines good training so they can make the choice, that opt-in choice, and decide whether they want to remain in the legacy system or go to the BRS. And then I concur with you. We don't know what the retention behavior will be with the BRS.
I believe we're going to have to be agile in that continuation pay and have a modern system that people want to stay in.
Okay. And then my final question, and just real briefly, I really want you to think about it, and if one of you has a chance to answer, but I really want you to think about this. In World War II, a lot of guys joined, and they were airborne because they got that $50 jump pay. I mean, it made a big difference. We still give jump pay and jump status and those things, and we have that. We really need to look at our legacy soldiers, whether they're in cyber and incentives to make those special. You know, being airborne is special, and being air assault is special. We need to do that with some of these low-density MOSs so that they're special and there's incentives. And then the other thing is those low-density MOSs, sometimes the promotion opportunities aren't there, and that probably applies across the Marine Corps and everywhere else. And, you know, we used to have like the Spec 7s and Spec 8s. They're not necessarily going to be leadership guys because they like doing the stuff that they do. I mean, a guy who flies an airplane wants to fly an airplane. He doesn't want to do some other things. And a guy who is in a signal unit or communications or cyber doesn't want to go command a company or a platoon. What he wants to do. So we really have to look at ways to incentivize them to stay by the pay. Are y'all looking at those kind of things?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Ms. Rosen, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank Ranking Member and everyone here for their testimony today. I want to build a little bit on that, especially in the areas of STEM. I've been working on some STEM Opportunities Acts, and so as you talk about the changing military and you talk about retention and the millennials and what you have to do to get people in linguistics and cyber, I'm a computer programmer myself by trade, you're going to have to be, you talk about deployables, they're deployed in a different way than maybe somebody who is flying or going into another space. So maybe they're deployed in a computer center. They're deployed operating drones. So how are you going to address some of these changes where people are actually really deployed here at home, maybe more of a desk job, maybe more of a intellectual job, and what are you doing in our high schools and universities to try to get these linguistics, cryptologists, computer programmers, and the like? Anyone can start, that's fine.
Ma'am, just to break up the movement, huh?
That's right. You don't always let him go first. That's
No, there's a pursuit for STEM, but both on the civilian side and on the military side. Those individuals who can come in and produce for the service. But first and foremost, we produce Marines. And while the cyber force, as it is beginning to grow, we initially went after this as a lateral move. So Marines who came in, prove their capability, leadership skills, then move over and get additional training. We have recognized with the growth of that force that we'll have to go into initial sessions as well. And so the challenge is, what is it that makes up that young man or woman who wants to be a cyber Marine, and what are the skill sets that we're looking for? What's their innate ability, and what would indicate to us? So we're looking at testing regimens to see whether or not we can help ourselves qualify. Those higher skill MOSs on the enlisted side, we do that by seeking those that get good line scores within the ASVAB, et cetera. So we've been very interested in the whole STEM. How do you pursue that? There are a number of different activities at the services. I went to an Air Force-sponsored cyber thing for high school. It was fascinating. Those kids were doing pretty amazing stuff. Right. And I said we should send people to the next one so we can start stealing from the Air Force, because they were putting up a really good thing. But those young men and women are important to us, and we're working, recognizing that, and expanding our ability to reach out to them.
On the recruiting front, though, you do have to plant the seeds early, so you have to get in even at the middle school level, and you have to go to science fairs, and you have to even sponsor those things. We do things similar to what the Air Force does, and we have displays and science fair types of activities to do, even hackathons and things like General Brikalis was talking about, and just spark the interest. And maybe at some point down the road, they'll associate that interest with the Navy and come back and talk to us. So you have to plant that seed corn and get that conversation going. In terms of how do you prepare that workforce then to work at a desk job, that's actually easier. So
because your talent in some of these may be people who don't necessarily see themselves as a certain type of military man or woman because they have maybe been in science or doing other things where they may not physically see themselves or emotionally see themselves in that way, but they have the talent to do these kinds of things, which we need the cyber Iron Dome, right?
Right.
Sorry, go ahead.
You just have to get them interested in the topic and then show them the rest of the story, what it looks like when they get there, which
Right.
may not be the World War II movie of
Right,
military.
right.
Well, we're actively recruiting STEM students, and we've done that in our ROTC, where if you want to get an ROTC scholarship, there's a certain requirement. And it's really a shift. For a while there, I think we got away from that. When we came in, you took engineering, you went to West Point, it was primarily an engineering school. If you got a master's, you got it in engineering, and we kind of shifted, but we're coming back, and we're coming back in a pretty good percentage because we need that foundation for a lot of these future type skill sets. So we've done things where, Hack the Army, where we're going out to some, and our cyber folks are really getting out there. And again, a lot of the young men and women are really excited about these opportunities to use those skill sets. And even in the Army, you still can serve in the Department of the Army civilian if you cannot meet the physical standards and still serve your country. So we're offering multiple ways for people to serve in STEM.
Thank you.
Ma'am, I would just add that the mission sells itself, and really a lot of it is us getting the word out that we have these tremendous opportunities, because I agree with you that people don't understand that there's tremendous opportunity for STEM and cyber within the United States military. So we find I go to a lot of mentoring events and a lot of job fairs and talk to women and men about the opportunities because they just don't know they exist. But then the mission, this is what they want to do. And as someone pointed out, there's some things you can only do in the United States military.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Mr. Russell, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you not only for what you do, but for being here today. Up-tempo deployment to dwell ratios, could you all speak to that a little bit?
Yes, sir. Many have thought the dwell time has gone down because the troop levels have reduced in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that's really not the case. We're rotating forces right now into Korea. We're rotating forces into Kuwait. We're rotating forces into Europe along with Iraq and Afghanistan. So the dwell time has not come down. And, the way we're trying to get after that is, and you're all helped with growing the Army by having soldiers available to conduct these task missions is helping us try to get that dwell time down.
Is it a 1-to-2 ratio, or what are we looking at?
In some cases, it's below that.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Admiral Burke.
Sir, just to paint a picture, pre-9/11, Navy had about 421 ships. We had on any given day, we had 100 ships deployed. Today, we have about 274 ships on any given day. We have 100 ships deployed. We've kind of backed down from our days a few years ago, having 9-month deployments. That's just deployed overseas on mission. And we've gotten back to more predictable schedules for our sailors. But we're doing that by riding our ships harder and keeping our sailors at sea longer. So it has come at a cost to our sailors and their families. Our sailors are doing it because we've gotten to be more predictable, and as long as we can maintain predictability and some expectation of what the schedule will be, they're willing to continue to sustain that tempo.
Thank you. General Brikalis.
Mr. Russell, thank you. The Marine Corps, like the Navy, is a deployed force, rotationally deployed force. with units heading out to Okinawa, out in the CENTCOM AOR, and now the Special Purpose MAGTFs in Africa and also in the CENTCOM AOR. On top of that, you've got some of the residuals for combat operations, existing RFFs that have gone on and on. So what we found, we came out of combat expecting this depth to dwell holiday, never happened. We have a number of units, and in the aviation community, some units well below 1 to 2. Our infantry is just below 1 to 2. And so we're deploying, we're coming back, and we're immediately going into a training cycle and a deployment cycle, because you deploy to train. And so we are finding that we are really roughing up not only our Marines and their families, but the gear doesn't have enough time to be reset. The training is being rushed before you go to the deployment. And while we are meeting our deployed requirements, the ready bench is a little bit ragged. Next to deploy are okay. Those the rest, it's a bit of a challenge. Sustaining this over time is going to be difficult. And but the 185, the additional 3,000, really just enabled us to maintain warfighting capability and introduce the new information capabilities that Commandant believe are necessary for the current fight and the battlefield of the future. So we still have no solution right now in meeting all the demands from the COCOMs and also getting our arms around the depth to dwell challenge.
General Grosso.
We've really never left the Middle East since 1991. So what you find is, depending on the skill set, and our high demand, low density, they do have much shorter, some 1 to 1, some 1 to 2. But I would say that's a small number of skill sets. What we find, though, is that even on a normal rotation, what's happening when you come home to get back up to speed in all of your mission sets, you're not home when you're home. And so something that we're spending a lot of time looking at is the time when people are at home. How do we give them more time? How do we give them more white space to spend that time regrouping, and growing end strength will also help us tackle some of that ops tempo.
Yeah, and I think, one of the factors too that you look at on returning units is about a third of your warriors will leave just at the end of their enlistments or in attrition, and then of those that you have, you're integrating a new batch, and then you have non-commissioned officers and officers that you got to get to the training. So that they can improve their skill sets, in the meantime doing all of the refit, reorganization. And I don't think that's often appreciated enough. So that's why I asked the question. I, like you, share great concerns over the blended retirement system. I think that it makes us very vulnerable. It'll be interesting to see in fiscal year 18 who opts for old versus new. I'm not sure we've got a solution there. And then the last concern, Mr. Chairman, just a comment, our continued cutting of incentives. BAH now on post, we're making soldiers pay living on post BAH shortfalls. It was Congress that screwed that up. So the more incentives we cut, the old adage, nothing is too good for the troops and nothing is what we'll give them, we've got to turn that around. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Dr. Winstrup, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it. So we've had really good conversation today, and the balance that you try to have with recruitment, retention, the quality of troops that you bring in, the opportunities that you offer someone who's joining the military, and the opportunities that they may have when they leave the military. Those are all components that go into someone making up their mind to serve, whether it's 4 years or for 20 years. I know when I hit about 12, I decided I was going to go for 20, and that made the most sense. And then the other thing that was discussed today, too, is what do our numbers look like compared to the requirements of each branch and of the military, the downtime, all these things that you have to be considering and balancing all the time to meet the current expectations and needs, and hopefully the future expectations and needs of our military. And I just would love to hear what you consider to be a couple of the greatest challenges you have in blending all of those things together as you look to the future. As you look to, well, not only today, but if you look 10 years down the road, the world we're living in today, and more so, what can Congress do to help you in that challenging mission? And we'll start on the other end and go the other way.
Sir, I would say what you can do to help us the most is stable funding over an extended period of time. Because the ups and downs, especially from a military manpower perspective, are impossible. If you just look at we've been decreasing since 1991 and took a hard ride up, and even on our civilian workforce, it's very, very difficult to manage a stable human capital strategy.
Sir, I'll echo General Grosso's comment with respect to funding. Extended CRs, short periods of time to spend additional cash, not doing it responsibly, et cetera, is really a challenge for all of us. What our Marines expect, they expect good training, they expect good weapons, and they expect a good mission.
I would echo the stable funding comment. We have, you know, the last 4 or 5 years, you know, kind of jump changes in end strength for a number of different reasons that cause us to do somewhat unnatural acts to meet those demands. But then the other thing that happens is sometimes our manpower overhead accounts, the things like the individuals accounts and the transients accounts are attractive targets to meet top line numbers. And even though you may have enough in your accounts to pay for the bodies, if you don't have enough to cover the overhead to have people in training, you really can't keep the total number of bodies in there. Over the last 4 years, what that's translated to for the Navy is an increasing number of gaps at sea. Today, I'm at about 7,000 gaps at sea in my forward deployed ships, and that's been cascading over the last 4 years. And you know, every year we've looked to program our way out of that, and it just becomes an attractive target. So you have to properly fund the overhead accounts as well as the total end strength. And then I think you know, the continued support that you've given us in the flexibility to help us. You know, all of us are doing some form of modernization of our personnel system, and we've appreciated the flexibility that you've given us as we look at that, because we all need to continue to take a look at that. We appreciate that. Thank you.
Since timely and predictable funding has already been covered, I'd just like to mention is the qualifications of American youth. And right before President Kennedy took office, he wrote a paper lamenting the fact that only 50% of Americans were qualified to basically serve in the military. We wish it was that today, and it's 25%. And you know, as we go in the future, we're going to have to take a hard look at the ability to get these extraordinary young men and women to serve. We're going to have to be very innovative to bring those qualified folks in. And recruiting, even though we make it, at least for the Army, is a tough mission, and we got to work that every single day.
Well, we could probably have another whole hearing just on the reasons for 50% down to 25%, and maybe we need to do that at some point. But I appreciate it, and it's, I also noticed some unanimity there on the stable funding, and I think everyone here recognizes that need, and I hope that we address that as we move forward. Thank you.
I've got sort of 4 questions related to accessions, and if you could go through them very quickly because we're limited in time. One is, what is your attrition rate during the first enlistment through administrative or adverse separation? 2, have you developed better screening tools in terms of recruiting to you know, not take those people in, or a certain profile of individuals that you could in terms of recruiting that you've learned not to take through some kind of measure? Why is it that we're getting on the MEP side, why do we have a gap between people that are accepted, deemed physically qualified, sent to recruit training, and then not deemed physically qualified and sent back home at taxpayers' expense? You know, it's expensive. And why do we have that gap? And then I want to know how many personnel that you have totally engaged in recruiting, not just line recruiters, but support staff and command staff as well. who's ready to go with
Sir,
that.
I'm ready to go.
Yes, Lieutenant General McConville.
28% attrition.
In the first tour of duty,
Yes, sir.
28%?
That's down from 35%.
Wow.
Yes, sir. And then as far as screening, we have two things in place.
I don't mean in terms of re-enlistment. I just mean
No,
administrative or
talking-
adverse
Sir,
selection.
I'm talking people because of misconduct, physical
Wow.
injuries do not finish the first term.
I'm very surprised. Okay.
It was running about 35%.
Wow.
And so it's coming down, and we're working that, and that's why we put a lot of things in place. And you talked about screening. We put an occupational physical assessment test
Okay.
in place. We have a TAPIS test. We're trying to get the right psychological fit, and we're
Okay.
doing longitudinal studies to allow us to bring those numbers down.
Okay. Okay. Then. Okay. So then, why the disparity in the physicals?
That's something I need to take that for the record.
Please do.
We know that happens,
Okay.
but we haven't been able to,
Do you know how many total personnel you have
12,000.
in recruiting?
About 12,000. I'll get you for the record, but it's about 12,000 with staff and recruiters.
Okay. Vice Admiral Burke, your attrition rate first tour of duty?
Is around 15%, about 12% in boot camp, three thereafter.
Okay.
And we are looking at we have screening tests in place. We're looking at some additional ones for destructive behavior
Okay.
profiling that we're piloting right now. The MEPS versus our service screening, we think we have a problem within our own Navy medical community that we're looking to close the loop, that we're being unnecessarily conservative, and we're continuing to work that. I have to come back to you on the exact numbers, but I think we're around 5,000 total. That about 3,000 recruiters and about 2,000 additional.
Okay. General Brikalis?
Mr. Chairman, non-NES attrition can be folded a number of different ways, but the short answer is less than 10%.
Less than 9%?
Less than 9, less than 10, 9%.
During the whole first term? Okay.
Well, during the whole first term,
First enlistment?
year over year, I'll take that for the record. We can
Okay.
answer
But
it.
is 9% in boot camp, recruit
Saying
training?
our non-ES attrition annually is less than 10%. Our attrition in, well,
I'm just concerned about in the first enlistment.
first enlistment.
That's all.
I've got to get you that answer.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
General Grosso?
I don't have first enlistment, but I do know 6% is our basic training.
Wow.
So I will get you that for the first enlistment.
Okay.
You want me to follow up with the rest of those?
Yeah. Well, how about very quickly MEPS? Why
got
is
it.
there a disparity?
So screening tools, Recruiter's the best screening tool we have. The process is probably the best.
But on the health side?
On the health side, the MEPCOM, I'd have to look at a particular specific. I know that we had a situation at one point where we had problems with the calibration of the hearing test at some of the MEPs, and it wasn't translating. That I know has been taken care of. We also had an issue in Colorado with lordosis, which I don't want to get into explanation
Sure.
what that condition is, but we got that fixed through
Okay.
working through the process. We have 5,300 Marines involved in recruiting.
5,300?
Yes, sir.
And that's support personnel, staff?
So at headquarters, production recruiters, non-production recruiters, that's it.
Okay. Thank you.
We have 2,300 people in our recruiting infrastructure, and we are working on better screening tools, and I will have to take for the record the MEPS question.
Okay. Okay.
This is all really helpful. It's interesting that the Marines have 5,300 in recruiting and yet 182,000 in the Marine Corps. Air Force has half as many recruiting and has 317,000. Do you want to address that, General?
Yes, ma'am. This year, we will have 38,000 enlisted non-prior service accessions. Like, as I mentioned, we're a young force. 2/3 of the forces in the operating forces. Every 4 years, we turn over 75% of each cohort. I had the second largest recruiting mission of all the armed forces.
Because there's such a high turnover, is that
That's
what you're
correct.
saying?
Yes, ma'am.
And so we need to look at why.
Because we're an inexpensive and we're a young force. The model that was created, because I can only put so
maybe
many
it's-
first-term Marines into the career force because there isn't that much of a career force.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to ask you to provide this to us for the record. So I'd like for you to each provide us with how you spend your advertising budget. TV, sponsor of events, and the like. General Grosso, in particular, I was at a Michigan game not so long ago in which they had Air Force planes flying overhead, and then had them skydive into the stadium, which was exciting to watch, but I couldn't help but sit there thinking, how much is this costing us? So if all of you would provide that, that would be helpful. In terms of the Navy, Admiral Burke, the anticipation of having 355 ships would be a huge increase in personnel. What are you doing in contemplating that? What trade-offs will the Navy be prepared to make to meet that financial commitment?
Well, in terms of the manpower increases, the exact number will depend on, what the makeup of that new force contract exactly would look like. So the answer is, it depends. That's obviously still being discussed.
If we add these ships, have you done an analysis of how many additional sailors and civilians you'll need?
We've done bounding analyses. Again, the discussions are, anywhere between 12 to 14 carrier strike groups, and then the composition of those. And then we think that force also needs to be a mix of manned and unmanned vessels as well. So that could also reduce the manpower increase. But we're very much looking at that. And then the time frame and the speed at which we build those vessels. So the answer is it depends. But anywhere from 20 to 40,000 additional sailors, depending on how we bound it. The infrastructure that we have in place in terms of our recruit training command is sufficient, given shipbuilding timelines to put enough sailors through there. We would have to ramp up additional drill, recruit division commanders, and perhaps additional training capacity, but probably not additional infrastructure is where we are with that right now, ma'am.
Okay. We spent some time asking the question where your retention areas were, and many of you reference cyber and intelligence in particular. I wonder to what extent those functions should be filled by civilians and the focus be placed there, with the expectation that if you're putting someone in the military in those positions, they're so attractive to companies outside that you're going to have them moving through there very quickly and constantly in a retraining mode. That's just an aside. It appears that the number one issue here is retention or attrition, depending how you look at it, I guess, in some respects. If you have a high attrition rate, then the costs of retraining are significant. So you want to reduce the attrition rate is where we want to go, correct? So I'd be interested in knowing what other, and I'm running out of time, so maybe for the record as well, what other programs, policies we should contemplate to address the attrition rate and find ways to reduce it. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Do you want to go ahead and finish your Just one very quick point. I think we're still locked into the promotion structure of, I think, the height of Iraq and Afghanistan. And is a promotion system too fast? When the ranking member talked about retention and the cost of training, the fact that it seems to be very competitive in a lot of career fields to stay in, are we forcing good people out that should otherwise stay in by virtue of our promotion system? Does anybody like to answer that?
Sir, I'd like to take that one for the question. I think we do. We are very much taking a look at, from a sustainability standpoint, we have a very broad personnel pyramid, very large at the base, that still very much assumes We can bring people in large volume and inexpensively. So a lot of our Sailor 2025 programs are aimed at narrowing the base of the pyramid, making it a little taller, so longer careers, and perhaps allowing more opportunities to repurpose the career, let people change their specialties throughout a career. We can relatively easily do that on the enlisted side with the authorities that we have, and we're doing that in Sailor 2025. A little harder to do that on the officer side without some additional policy relaxations, and we're working with your teams to explore those opportunities.
Anybody else? Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, the way our model works with the pyramid in law is only 10% of enlisted soldiers really can make it to 20 years, and 30% of officers serve a full career. That's kind of how the model works, and this has been especially exacerbated during the drawdown when we went from 570,000 soldiers on the way to 460,000, so almost 100,000 soldiers, either attrited or were asked to leave that may have been fully qualified from the Army over the last 5 years.
Anybody else? Yes.
On the enlisted side, we allow people to stay that haven't been promoted. So I shared that with you. That the first commander. On the officer side, for the longest time to major, we've had a 95% promotion rate. So I wouldn't make the argument that we're losing talent because of the promotion system.
So we promote the vacancy. We've got a lot of platoon leaders. We have a lot of squad leaders and a lot of Marines. They move their way up, and I have fewer spots for folks as we go. So the upper out system, the way we do business, makes it very competitive, allows us to get to find the talent, and we've got processes in place where individuals that have devoted a good chunk of their life to service are allowed to be continued to 20 years, staff sergeants and majors.
Okay. Mr. Spear, anything else? I wish to thank the witnesses for their enlightening testimony this afternoon. There being no further business, the subcommittee stands adjourned.